Okay, welcome to the Kaysville City Planning Commission for Thursday, August 9th. We'll start with item number 2, conditional use permit for major home occupation B, group swimming lessons at 2052 West Peach Blossom Drive for Cameron Gardner.
Okay, I'll go ahead and introduce that, and then Mr. Gardner is here this evening if there are questions of the applicant. His property, I'm going to get used to this new clicker, is just on the west side of town in the Hill Farms development off of Peach Blossom Drive. They have a swimming pool in the backyard, and as such you're hoping to do swimming lessons from the property. They teach them during the summer months, so generally when school is not in session. Their morning classes, typically 30 minutes apiece, and they'll do 2 groups of 4, so about 8 students at a time. Speaking with them, you get people that walk there from the neighborhood, often they're dropped off. Sometimes they come as a family in a car or something, multiple students in the same vehicle. Based on the fact that it is a group lesson, our ordinance does require that there be a limit placed on either the number of students or the number of vehicles. It tends to be easier to monitor students on a regular basis. And so based on that, staff's recommending approval of the conditional use based on our understanding of how it's set up, with the condition that the number of students be limited to no more than 8 per session. And with that, I will turn it back to the commission. Be happy to take any questions you may have. And again, I'll let you know that the applicant's here if you have questions of them.
Thank you. Any questions?
Just one. Lyle, what are you basing the 8 students limit on?
Based on how they're doing the business, so it accommodates what the applicant is hoping to do, and then often just based on experience, we've gone up to as many as 12 in some of our classes on anticipated traffic. So if there were perhaps a willingness from the Planning Commission to say go beyond that, but the applicant and I, having discussed things, felt 8 was sufficient. That covered what he needed and would limit the traffic impacts.
I have a question. So will more than one class take place at the same time?
Sort of. So maybe he can explain this a little better, Mr. Gardner. But so they have 2 instructors, I guess. They're kids and family that teach. So they do 2 different groups. Each one of them can only have as many as 4 students in a group. Okay. And so you might have a beginner and an intermediate type level in the pool at the same time. But again, so no more than 8.
Yeah, I think before, too, when we've limited the numbers, we've had people come in that wanted more, and we've limited it down. But that doesn't limit them from coming back at a future time and asking for more if there hasn't been any complaints or any issues with it. I don't think we've ever had anybody come back in, but that's an option, I believe.
So the limit is 8 per time period, basically?
Correct.
Okay. Are we ready for a motion, or do we want more discussion?
Do we need to hear from the applicant, or is he good?
He's nodded in affirmative, so I've seen twice.
Okay.
I'll take a motion.
Okay. I'll make a motion to approve a conditional use permit for major home occupation B, group swimming lessons at 2052 West Peach Blossom Drive for Cameron Gardner.
I'll second that.
Do we want to limit it to 8? Do we need that as part of the language?
Oh.
Yeah, if you were the
Limited to 8
reference.
students per session.
Okay.
I'll second that.
You go ahead, Sarah.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Great, thank you. Good luck. Next is a conditional use permit for amendment to a public utility substation and storage facility for Scott Parcell of the Benchland Water District at 485 East Shepherd Lane.
Okay, and by way of introduction, so just off of the Shepherd Lane overpass west of I-15, the mentioned irrigation district, giving you the wrong name here, I know it, but has been there for several years. And their original approval, when they came before the Planning Commission back in the 90s, they got approval for the building, the use of the site for their facility, and they did show, it's a little bit hard to see on this, but storage, essentially open storage on the property on the east end. So several years have passed. They're still operating in the same manner. but are hoping to now be able to organize that a little bit and close some of it, and are asking approval essentially to amend their site plan to put in a new storage building on the northeast side of the property, and some bins for the storage material, base, gravel, and so forth. So you can see a little bit closer. The building itself is about 1,100 square feet in floor area, and the bin's about 450 square feet apiece. Ultimately, the building that would be placed on them, just a little two-car garage type deal. Got to go to my numbers here to give you the specifics on it. It's a single-story structure. I'm looking for your height on it. I have it placed in there. Let me give you a height on it. So it's about a 13-foot wall to the top of the building with the pitch. It's about an 18-foot total on the building. Based on its placement, the kind of the existing conditions and the use of the property, been over there and taken a look at things. Staff's recommending approval essentially as proposed. I think in a lot of ways it cleans up and improves the site rather than creates additional impacts under the same use. Benchwind does have a representative here tonight if you wish to get additional details on the project, and again, I'll turn it back over to the commission if you have questions.
Thank you.
Question, Lyle. So this is, the conditional use is for a public use in the A1 zone? Is that what it is?
Yeah, so the A1 zone allows for public and quasi-public uses, but it also allows for public utilities. And so this falls under the utility,
public utility
provider.
Got it, right.
And so the use essentially remains the same, but they're looking for an amendment to their site plan as it was originally approved.
Right. And their site plan originally showed that area was, that's where they've been storing stuff just outside. Now they want to include
Correct,
it.
yeah. The use essentially remains the same. It has just been open storage rather than enclosed storage on the property. Be a little more organized and tidy with the bins too, I think.
Yeah.
So I drive by this every day, and I should know the answer to this question, but do you see this site from Shepherd Lane?
Yes and no.
where
So
this-
it's right
where the-
off Shepherd Lane. The landscaping and vegetation screens it quite a bit.
Yeah, that's what I was.
So really, you almost can't even tell anything's there until you hit really the bottom of the embankment and the bridge and start turning on Shepherd
Yeah.
with this arc, and then you see the building. So it's pretty well screened, certainly from Shepherd.
And the building we're talking about is going to go in west or east of the existing building, right in there. Yeah.
Just about in line with the existing building to the east of it, correct?
I guess we haven't heard from what would be the backyard neighbor.
Not heard any comments in our office on it. I think they may be the beneficiaries of it, as it would screen kind of the open type storage on the property.
Yeah.
There's an easement that runs along the property for, I think, multiple utilities, and so essentially up to where the building is now. So they can't push it any closer in order to keep out of that easement. So there is some space and buffering, but not a lot of room or landscaping necessarily. It's open, but the building itself, I think, would provide some visual screening.
I noted on the conditional use from a long time ago, there were some aesthetic conditions or something with respect to the elevations, and the staff was given the authority to dictate how it looked. Do we have any of those concerns here, or are these drawings good enough that?
I feel it's appropriate for a storage type building. I think as a planning commission, you could consider that if you desire. So yeah, they did at that time on the existing office building, let the applicant work with staff on some of the design features so that it wasn't just a industrial steel building, any other kind of thing that you might find anywhere. So I think where this one isn't fronting the property and abutting kind of that street aesthetic, it may not be as important, but if you feel that would be an appropriate condition and you can link it to a standard and reason that needs mitigating, then we could consider that.
I'm inclined to think if it's not very visible from the street, we don't need to worry about it being, kind of juiced up a little bit. But
It sounds like it's an improvement for the neighbors.
if the
over what
vegetation
they
goes
currently
away,
have.
though, I guess that might be,
Yes, that's about the only concern I'd have, where it's a public utility substation storage facility. It would allow for additional uses down the road, and they wouldn't have to come back. They'd still have to come in for a building permit if they decided to expand and build more storage facility in there, or other use that was within that, that ordinance.
Yeah, so similar to, we've changed what was originally approved, and they're here, just as Commissioner Bullock stating, if they want to change this again, they need to come back before the commission and seek your blessing.
Lyle, it looks like the vegetation that we're talking about may not actually be on their property. Can we stipulate something that if it is removed, that we can require them to come in and add vegetation of some sort? I mean, it looks like you've got a fairly big section that isn't theirs.
Yeah, so you're, I believe, probably accurate there, Commissioner Wood. A lot of it is part of the right-of-way along Shepherd Lane where you're seeing lots of these trees. So, yeah, they wouldn't necessarily get to control that, and if something were to happen, yeah, if you
Tomorrow,
feel,
someone else could come through, take out all the vegetation, and we have no visual block anymore, and they have no control over it.
correct.
I think if we just assure that there's some kind of obstruction between, view obstruction between Shepherd Lane and the storage, that it seems like to me that'd work, but.
I'll ask the applicant a question, too, that just may play into that. I believe there's fencing around the property. Do you know what kind of fencing? Okay.
Okay.
Slatted? Or not? Okay, open chain link? We'll go on a virtual tour here for a second. Click on the guy again.
Okay.
The new building would be right in this area.
Yeah.
So even if somebody were to come and remove the trees and anything out there, I don't know why they would, but they did. The new building, I think, adds to it.
I do too.
Yeah.
You're right,
I
it
agree.
cleans it
It's
up,
nice.
it adds, it gets rid of the raw ground and dresses it up a little bit.
I agree.
There is a likely scenario in the not immediate but foreseeable future that something happens with Shepherd Lane where work may be done there, and who knows what happens within the right-of-way to the street and the trees and so forth. They could remain, they could go, I have no idea, frankly, at this point in time, but Shepherd Lane's on the radar for a street that needs some work, so.
I think, I'll make a motion and have it with some condition about some aesthetics, maybe some, ensure that there's some vegetation that helps obstruct the view, something like that. Does that work for you folks, or do you want to just go straight and let it go? I'm not.
Well, there's not a lot, when you look at those street views, I mean, the trees do block it, but you can see the fence until you get further down, kind of in that
Further east, yeah.
southeast end. Then it looks like they're just kind of wild vegetation on both sides of the fence, actually, is what it looks like. So,
Yeah, I'm not inclined to restrict requiring vegetation of some sort to block the view. Based on the street level stuff that we saw, it actually looks like it drops down a little bit. And planting a 6-foot tree isn't going to do a whole lot of good for about 10 or 12 years.
I'd be more inclined to want to see some landscaping or something within it, don't you think, to make it look more, just nicer, more professional inside?
And right now, with the ordinance, there's not any, I mean, if we rezone to this, there's not any requirements
Right.
for that, are there? I don't believe so.
So, yeah, we kind of bumped into this a little bit last one. So if you're talking the landscaping, is there specific, the way that the ordinance is set up for an industrial, institutional, commercial type use, anyway, non-residential, there's 10% landscaping, which they'll have met easily on this already. Some requirement for areas adjacent to a street to have trees, essentially one tree every 300 square feet. So it's a tree every 30 feet is roughly what it is for those 10-foot landscape buffers. So that could, in some account for that street frontage you're talking about, and we could reference that ordinance that in the event the trees are removed, trees must be replaced per Kaysville City landscape street frontage requirements. And that would just essentially say these trees go, new trees could come in on their side of the fence to meet that ordinance.
Actually, I'm okay with that. I don't like, forcing them to do stuff, but if something's removed
Just
down the
replace it.
road, to replace it, but to require them to install a barrier right now, some type of a screen, I'd say if it's removed for some reason, if Shepherd Lane's widened or something like that, that they'd have to come back in and, plant some type of trees or vegetation or something.
Okay, let's make
It
a
may
motion
never
to-
happen, but
Yeah. I'm gonna turn
so
that
are you
into
going
motion. You do it.
Oh, you want me
It's
to do the
yours.
motion?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve a conditional use permit for amendment to a park utility substation storage to Benchland Water District at 485 East Shepherd Lane, which is currently an A1 light agricultural zone now, and with a condition that in the event that the vegetation and landscaping on Shepherd Lane is ever removed, that they would be required at that time to go back in and replace at least something that's comparable or equal to what was removed.
Second.
Aye.
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 Great. Let's see. Okay, next is a public hearing for an ordinance amending Chapter 19-4, final plat of Title 19, subdivisions of the revised ordinances of Kaysville City.
We're going to throw you for a loop if I can interrupt, I apologize,
Sure.
Mr. Chair. We amended the agenda recently, and we hadn't get hard copies to you because we did it shortly.
Right. Is that
And
this
we
item
can
there?
do the public hearing if you'd like, or finish the conditional use. It's up to you.
Do you want it?
The amended one.
Okay, so you want to do number 4, this the amended 4?
Just
first?
as it's
Okay.
ordered, unless you want to reorder
Okay.
the agenda,
No,
that's
that's
fine
fine.
either way.
So we'll do a conditional use permit for food manufacturing bakery at 590 North, 900 West, Suites 104 and 112 for Keto Cakes, Utah LLC.
Sorry to throw you a curveball. It's rare that we amend the agendas, but in this case, we had done some correspondence that got lost in the mix, and so the applicant didn't know the time frame on it, and so we felt a conditional use without a public hearing, it would be appropriate to get them on based on their time frame. Here in the business park, it's lot 117C, that 590 Kays Drive. It's a new building, so it's not yet visible here in the aerial. But if you use your imagination, it looks something like this. There are 16 suites in there. They'd be taking 2 of them. The business, anyway, the light industrial zone essentially requires anything that's considered food manufacturing or processing be approved by conditional use. And this is a bakery, and so probably a low-key manufacturing or more pleasant than maybe others might be, but play it safe, we wanted to bring it for the commission for consideration for approval. Keto Cakes has a unique cupcake product. They've got representation here tonight. I'd let them explain that if you're interested. They'd bake on site, and then usually about 5 people per shift. I guess they employ 15 people total, and they rotate them throughout the day in the different shifts as they're baking. Once they're created, they put the cupcakes in a truck, and they go out to a certain location where their customers meet them to pick up their orders. So they may, over time, is my understanding, do some retail sales out of here as potential, but the current model is essentially baking, take their product elsewhere and sell it. Based on that, with the recent development of this and the way it was set up, every unit essentially got, about 5 off-street parking stalls, I think, was essentially available per unit. They would only require 6 based on their employee count on their highest shift, and so they do have extra and plenty of parking for that. That was essentially my concern when I heard it was a bakery. I don't know that there are going to be too many noxious smells that come off of that type of food processing, or based on that, staff's recommending approval as proposed without additional conditions. Again, the applicant and someone from Keto Cakes is here if you'd like to find out more about it.
Well, it'd be nice to have the applicant tell us. Sounds interesting. So if you want to come to the rostrum there and just tell us a little bit about what you're doing, we'd be interested. Thank you.
So we are Keto Cakes, and we bake gluten-free, sugar-free cupcakes that go with the keto diet, which is high fat and low carb. They're 2 to 4 net carbs, which is kind of unheard of. They're delicious. So a lot of people have to eat gluten-free or celiac, so they can have these. Most cakes that you make that way are very dry, and these are very moist. And they're also great for diabetics. They don't change your blood sugar. So we just need a facility to bake them in, because we rent a commercial kitchen currently in Salt Lake, but twice a week we drive all of our stuff there, bake, drive all of our stuff home, and our garages are full. So we just need a place to do our own baking.
How many square feet is the facility going to be?
I think that it is 4,000. Is that something?
I think each unit's, I think it's a 36,000 square foot building divided by 2, so yeah, they've got about 4,000 total. Just over 4,000 with the 2 suites.
So is there going to be any freezers on that you're going to have in there too, and
Yes.
you're going to be able to?
Fridge and freezer.
Uh-huh.
What's your name? Jesse. Jessie.
So is this a delivery service?
Yes.
Really? So you deliver to homes after you bake them?
Well,
That's
sorry,
great.
not delivered homes. We do all pre-orders online.
Okay.
And then we bake, and then the next day we take them out in a refrigerated truck to 6 pickup spots across the Wasatch Front, and people have a half an hour window to come pick up their cupcakes.
That's awesome.
Interesting.
Our first week we had 250 cupcakes ordered, and we did it out of my house, and then now we
Wow.
have over 5,000 pre-orders.
Wow.
Great.
That is fantastic. So you're not building the building, you're just leasing space in this building, right? Okay.
So what kind of, do you have to have hood systems and fire suppression systems, all that stuff when you bake versus grilling, or?
Commercial kitchen
We
requirements.
don't use a stove top.
Uh-huh, so it's just
We just
ovens.
have a large oven that holds 500 cupcakes at a time. We have someone coming out tomorrow to inspect and give us more details.
A lot of cupcakes.
That, yeah, that's impressive.
I don't have any other issues or questions.
Okay, someone want to make a
I'll
motion?
make a motion that we grant a conditional use permit for food manufacturing bakery for Keto Cakes Utah, Jessica Pond at 590 Kays Drive.
Second.
Aye.
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 Aye. Congratulations,
Yeah.
it'll be fun for you.
Good luck. Okay, next is the public hearing I announced earlier for an ordinance amending Chapter 19-4, title, let's see, of the revised ordinances of Kaysville City, providing for repealer and severability and providing for an effective date.
Okay. I'll try and make this brief. So we very recently approved an ordinance that granted the Planning Commission the power essentially to act as the approval body for a final plat. in the drafts of that, this was actually taken care of, but when we put the final ordinance together, we missed putting in this section of it, so we currently have conflicting language in the ordinance. One section says the city council still is, but the intent was it's still the planning commission. With the severability, we're in the clear, but we like to keep things clean, so we're just polishing that up and making that change at this time just to affirm what's already been decided. Of note, the tiny other change with that, it says there that someone submitting for that needs to submit 6 hard copies. I updated that with what we more often see, just a digital copy and a hard copy, and that's what we receive as staff for our reviews. So that way we modernized it a little bit on how we deal with that. So that's the short and sweet of it. If you have questions, please let me know. It is a public hearing, so as mentioned by the chair, you can open it up to the public and take some comment and then have your discussion.
Thank you. All right, any discussion before we open up the public hearing? Okay, the public hearing on this item is now open. If you have any comments or questions, concerns, please come to the front and let us know.
Does he want to come out? Okay.
Let the record reflect that was a no.
I bet if they left the cupcakes up there.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Any further discussion on this item? It seems like we're just cleaning things up. And it's, so you want a motion to recommend the
Correct, to the
amendment?
council.
Okay.
Well, I'll go ahead and recommend approval for an ordinance amending Chapter 19-4, final plat of Title 19 subdivisions of the revised ordinance of Kaysville City, providing for a repealer, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date.
Second.
Aye.
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 Aye. Okay. Next is a public hearing for ordinance amending Section 17-34-9 flag lot subdivision of Chapter 1734 PRUD Planned Residential Unit Development of Title 17 Planning and Zoning of the Revised Ordinances of Kaysville City, providing for repealer, severability, and an effective date.
So the majority of you will remember several discussions of this. We do have 2 new commissioners, so I'll bring it to speed just slightly. I'm trying not to belabor it too much, but we've had multiple applications of recent, or at least interest from property owners on doing a flag lot type subdivision on cul-de-sac streets. We always get those questions in staff, but it seems to have ramped up significantly over the past year or so. So we've brought it before the Planning Commission to talk about it and find a way to potentially address it. And the way our ordinance currently reads, while we've permitted them in the past, it simply says cul-de-sac streets are not allowed, flag lots are not allowed on cul-de-sac streets. So previously we've talked about, is it okay 100 feet away from the through street where the cul-de-sac intersects, 500 feet, is there a certain distance? What are the concerns, utilities, emergency access, and so forth? So we've talked about it quite a bit internally on a staff level with our different departments, pros, the cons, things we're concerned about. And ultimately what this ordinance proposes is that we simply scratch the line that says cul-de-sac flag lots, are not permitted on cul-de-sac streets. And the reason that we felt that's okay from a staff level, being that it's part of the PRUD ordinance, it's a case-by-case type decision essentially, because it does require a legislative decision and a zoning action to allow for it. I think the overall consensus internally is that they haven't been a problem where we have them in town. Utility-wise, it's fine. Emergency services, it's actually fine. We think that it could be fine in just about every situation, even on our longest cul-de-sacs, to allow them. But at the same time, having the PRUD discretion essentially on the case-by-case, there could be a circumstance that comes up that perhaps isn't appropriate. And ultimately, the council, with the recommendation from the commission, could look at that in a case-by-case and make it an alternate decision. So a simple text change, that's the proposal. I believe if there are questions, I'll leave it at that and turn it back to you. And I believe there are some public here for this. So again, another public hearing. I'll turn it back to the chair to open that up.
Thank you. All right. We'll open up for the public hearing then for this item number on the amending of the ordinance for flag lots and cul-de-sacs. Anyone here? Thank you. Please come forward and state your name.
Yes, Mark Taylor. I just am a resident here, and I have a property next to me that I'm on a cul-de-sac with a property for a flag lot. And as I've looked at it, I think one recommendation I would make to you is, right now the ordinance allows for flag lot of one home on a 30-foot access or two homes on if it's 36 or 38 width access. And I think when you look at a cul-de-sac, you have limited parking in there. My recommendation would be to, if you're allowing a flag lot on a cul-de-sac, is to only allow for the 30-foot and one resident, one flag lot, just because of the parking, the driveways. There's just not a lot of access there for those residents. So that would just be my recommendation, is to limit that by ordinance to only having one home or one flag lot available on a cul-de-sac. Thank
So
you.
no double flag.
No double flag on a cul-de-sac, yes. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else would like to take some time at this public hearing? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Staff, what do you think about the double flag lot? I think that's an interesting question. Obviously, with this cul-de-sac, we have limited
Wouldn't that
parking.
depend on the width of the cul-de-sac and how many houses are in there and
The size of the land,
Yeah,
too,
the
that's
size of the
being
land.
proposed.
Sure, and I think you're hitting it spot on. So I think as a staff, and again, it's other people get to make the call, so that's why you get paid the bigs, right? But we don't have concern with that necessarily. And in fact, one of the things we like about this is, again, case by case. Perhaps it isn't appropriate in certain areas, and we can make that call. Yeah, I think Mr. Taylor speaks to a very real point that driveways and approaches take up a significant amount of the curb space at the end of a cul-de-sac, so parking can get difficult, and that's bad for residents. That's good for our fire department, because hopefully nobody's parking there because they can't, and then they've got the full turnaround. So there are pros and cons to it, really, and I think that's case by case. So I would say we're comfortable with either way as staff. Personally, it doesn't matter to me if you feel that that's necessary to restrict that. I think this gives us the ability to look at each one and its merits. You may have a cul-de-sac with only one house at the end where maybe it's okay to do a double, or you may have the ones with multiple that are common. And I don't know which is right, but it's a philosophical issue more than from a staff perspective, a technical problem to allow those extra units.
That's why I like it on a case-by-case basis, because Mr. Taylor did make some very valid points on that, but we've had some before where, the flag lot's been proposed on, 2 or 3 acre parcel, and you get something that big, you can do it. So I like the ability to do it on a case-by-case basis, and, then we can use discretion and what makes sense.
I know this predates probably most of the staff, maybe not Andy. What was the rationale for not allowing flag lots on cul-de-sacs to begin with?
Quickly, the history was about 10 years ago, or maybe a little more. We had, particularly here on the east side of town, in the old town site area with the large lots, several flag lots come in. As probably most of you are aware, some people just don't like flag lots in general. Mm-hmm. And there's arguments on that side. Ultimately, they put a committee together to address some of that infill type development. And flag lots was one of the major issues discussed. And I think the idea of it was to reduce the number of flag lots that could be allowed. The reasoning that was stated was that on a cul-de-sac, we already have a limit on how deep the cul-de-sac could be. We had a case where people had a 600-foot cul-de-sac, which was the full limit, and then another 250 feet of flag stem beyond that. So it was felt like you were getting 800-foot, 900-foot cul-de-sacs instead of the 600 feet. The truth is 600 feet is an arbitrary number that works for us based on our emergency services and the equipment that we have. So I think that's why that language was put in there. A lot of it was just to reduce the total amount of properties that would be eligible for flag lots.
Okay. So no actual reason aside from it was a preference, right?
Well, when we talked about this a couple of times, we were also concerned about the emergency services and utilities and whether there was enough, whether it was too long, and I think they checked in on it and turned out it wasn't really the concern that we thought it was.
Yeah, we've talked with the fire chief extensively, and he says as long as it meets our fire code, if they get too long, they have to run a fire hydrant part way down the stem.
Yeah.
They didn't have any real concerns beyond that.
Sounds good to me. Sounds good. It allows some flexibility.
I agree.
As Lyle mentioned, the PRUD overlay is a zoning process. You can deny it just because.
We have more latitude, yeah.
Also, our PRUD zone allows you to require a development agreement if you feel it's necessary. So you have quite a bit of control on what you need to before you allow that type of development at all.
The PRUD zone doesn't have a minimum acreage requirement or anything, does it?
It does not.
The flag lot itself does, however, so you've got to at
okay.
least be 10,000 square feet. So even in our R18 zone, for example, that only requires 8,000 square foot lots. Anyway, you always have to have at least 10,000 square feet or larger. And we find that they're frequently on bigger properties because of the setback requirement on it is larger than a typical lot to get a big enough building area. So
And the drive width
different factors.
stays the same. That doesn't change.
That's correct.
For the
We
stem.
require a 30-foot stem, and as was mentioned, if you go to a double flag, it didn't make sense to go to two 30-foot stems side by side. That's bigger than a public street.
Yeah.
So we go to 36 with a 20-foot paved driveway shared between the two property owners.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready for motions.
I'd make a motion that we recommend approval of the agenda item and ordinance amending section 1734-9 flag lot subdivision of chapter 1734 PRUD planned residential unit development of title 17 planning and zoning of the revised ordinances of the city, providing for a repealer, providing for severability, and providing for an effective date.
Second.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you. Appreciate your input. Next is the planning and projects presentation.
Hey, give us just a moment. We're going to swap computers here.
And watch the Partridge Family.
That's not how I remember that.
Where's the bus? Where's the bus?
Hey, Lyle, I thought you just might like to know, Andy. So when I first started using the Wi-Fi here, it was working great. I could access the ordinances and everything, and within a few minutes, I couldn't anymore. It stopped working fast.
We've been talking to our staff on that. Yeah, that's my test. Is it's hit and miss. Like,
Yeah.
apparently, the speeds are the same as every other network internal that we use as staff. But I've found that same thing, that it's a little bit spotty on when it works and when it doesn't. So, for the rest of you, so you're aware, I will pointing that out and liking to have the ordinance in front of him. He asked for a hard copy of something, and if there's anyone else interested in having that for the meetings, I forget who's got what at this point, just shoot me an email and we'll be happy to make sure you've got that if that's how you'd like to access it. So what I've got here, I was planning on taking 15 or so minutes. I'll probably go longer than that, but hopefully not too much. And yet we can take as much time as the Planning Commission can stomach within an hour. I don't know. We don't want to go too long, but with a couple new planning commissioners on, and then just kind of going back recently, I think an application brought up a project in the area that I noticed brought several questions from the commission. I thought it'd be behoove us to go over just a little bit some of the things that are happening in Kaysville, some data and information about it. So as you're making decisions, you got a little background as to maybe why that decision might be necessary or not. It might inform how you make it. And so as I go through this, please stop, ask questions. I hope this can be informal. This is something I put together for a real estate group in town a couple months ago. I just edited it briefly, so much of it you'll know about, but hopefully there's some things that are of use for us. So Kaysville City, one of the first areas settled in Davis County after the Mormon pioneers entered into Utah, and it was the very first city incorporated. So we've got within Davis County in 1868. Quite a bit of history. You can see some of the old buildings in town, and I think that's an important part of Kaysville City is we still hang on to some of that and have some historic areas throughout. As you know, we're middle of the Wasatch Front, and pretty much central between Salt Lake and Ogden, surrounded by all kinds of pretty spectacular amenities, education opportunities. Go skiing, go to Lagoon, Hill Air Force Base, right? Lots of employment in the area, so we're pretty fortunate to be where we're at. And because of that, Kaysville's seen a lot of growth over the years. Currently, we sit at about 33,000 with our population, and you can see how that's just shot up over the years. We've actually slowed down a little bit from some of the busiest decades, and Andy probably knows how crazy that was probably at the time on building permits and what you're seeing. It's a young population. Over a third of the population is under the age of 16. You can see the blue and orange there. I think it's an under 18 number there. But we're very young. That tends to hold true for the state as a whole, and it applies here for Kaysville. We're pretty well off, an affluent community in general. So we've got here Dick's Kaysville City on the left with an average or medium household income at about $86,000 compared to $70,000 for the rest of Davis County and $59,000 for the state. A lot of owner-occupied housing, and we enjoy some low tax rates. And we could always enjoy lower, right? But I guess when you compare it with some of our neighbors and others, that just is the data where we're at. Currently, we do roughly 150 new homes every year in Kaysville, so ebbs and flow year to year. There's roughly about 500 total permits that are issued from our building department, remodels, additions, but 150 new dwellings on a typical annual basis. This is something that comes from, I believe it's like an Experian report, credit card data and stuff that kind of pulls out spending habits and data trends, and it goes beyond that from a company called Buxton that provided us for this. And it shows that we're a little bit homogenous as far as the demographic, a little bit of diversity, but the majority of them, these tall points there on the left, speak to who lives in Kaysville, and they call it this flourishing families group. So a little fuzzy for me on the big screen, but it says the key features. These are affluent, charitable, and they enjoy athletic activities, they save for college, they're involved with their schools, and they do family-oriented activities. And generally large households with the majority having younger children between the ages of 4 and 6, live in single-family dwellings. They tend to be pretty tech-savvy. Again, if you care to stop me and dig into some of this, but it just shows a little bit about incomes, again, and education levels, a lot of higher education, a lot of higher incomes we tend to see. So that's who we are. What's next for us? We live in, we're always competing for whether we're the fastest or not, but certainly one of the fastest growing states in the U.S. Percentage-wise. This was from 2016 when we were number one. And so the state's growing, and certainly Kaysville is growing, and so we're going to continue to see that. It's an estimate of a projection. It's like looking into a crystal ball, so take it for what it's worth. But putting in 150 homes a year, we'll slow down eventually as we run out of land, but we'll be growing
just
too.
Back on that one real quick.
Please.
It looks like right about where we're at now, we taper off and start leveling out. Is there a reason for that? I mean, honestly, the red line is going up, and suddenly it kind of slows.
Yeah, we're running out of space.
Okay. Wondered if that was the reason.
So yeah, being trapped between the mountains and the lake, there just isn't a lot of room to build anymore, and the pressure will still be there to continue building. So right here, and again, I could email you a copy of this or something after. It shows essentially what's available to build on, and even this is a little bit out of date. Some of this is entitled. So there are roughly 400 acres of unentitled, undeveloped property west of I-15. East, there's really not much of anything. There are some things here and there, but we're filling up, and so that's why that population projection slows down. We're filling it in currently with a lot of the single-family homes at a certain level, so we have an idea of those densities, what that growth might look like.
So with the 400 acres, does that include anything that's zoned commercial, industrial?
It does not. So yeah, those are our current residential properties. We have about 110 acres undeveloped commercial property in addition to that. And on this map, so it's more pink on mine, but it looks purple up on the screen. They're projected based on a general plan and kind of trends around the 2 unit per acre type development that you might see. The yellow are the commercial areas, business park near Boondocks. East of I-15, they're essentially expansion areas. So this is Crestwood Road and the Simmons family property, which, while undeveloped, they're just basically large estate lots, and that's probably what it will continue to be. But the Mutton Hollow Township is on our annexation policy plan as an area that might become part of Kaysville City one day. So a different way of growing than simply development, but there are also land within that could be further developed.
There's, it seems like one way to develop is to have the currently agricultural properties get, bought and developed. Does this map or these numbers take into account? It doesn't take into account the agricultural.
This is essentially the farms that we anticipate will be developed are these areas. So the greenfield development, infill development, is another form that could happen. So those are the existing developed neighborhoods where people come in and want to do a flag lot or home behind their house, or redevelopment where they might demo an area and do something totally different. So this doesn't necessarily account for those scenarios, but yeah, this is the farm that likely would turn over to new homes and subdivisions one day. Yeah. I've done it
I have a
now,
question.
so hold on. Please go
Of the
ahead.
400 acres, the 110 undeveloped commercial acreage, is any of
Okay.
it in big parcels, or is it just a half an acre here and an acre there and pretty much broken up? There's not a big...
Some of them are pretty big. So, for example, I guess I'm using this for the laser. I'm confusing myself. One of the things that does calculate in that number, and I've kind of adjusted for it, it's a little hard to see, but this is the rail trail, and there are a number of empty lots that go up and down that are owned by Jordan Valley Water District. Technically, they're subdivided, platted, buildable lots. Someday when the Bear River pipeline goes through and they're done with what they want to do, they may sell those, and you'll see homes. But each, to give you an idea, they're half-acre lots, roughly. There are probably about 50 of them up and down that stretch. You go over to this area. So this is, in fact, actually property that Symphony Homes has received approvals for, the preserved subdivision off of Angel Street. That's 40 acres. So I'll give you a size perspective there of 40. There's roughly 80 acres here. You're over 100 plus down here. So there are some larger pieces where neighborhoods could come in. Essentially along 200 North, near Angel Street, the far west end of 200 North is this corner, and then this is the south end of Angel Street in Sunset. So, there may be other properties in there that are deep lots or something, again, that aren't accounted for, but just to give you an idea where we stand. So with that, just some things that are happening in the area. So again, growth's coming, and it's not just happening in Kaysville, throughout the whole region. And the state tends to deal with a lot of that. And just to kind of give you an idea on what traffic projects are happening in the area. US 89, if you're not aware, is going to be converted to freeway status, essentially, where there will be no more at-grade crossings. So we'll be able to go all the way north and south along it from Main Street Farmington exit all the way up to I-84 without having to stop at signals. That really only directly affects Kaysville technically at Crestwood Road, where it will shoot underneath the new freeway. But 400 North is essentially 200 North here in town in Fruit Heights. We'll have a new interchange where you can get on and off the freeway there, and Oak Hills Drive, also an interchange. Those are some of the closest ones to it. That's scheduled to start construction next year. There's some hiccups along with that and lawsuits and things, so when that actually happens to be seen, but that's right there on the radar, and it's funded. Going from east to west, I-15's got some construction projects in the works next year as well, some express lanes, finishing those up along I-15 in our neck of the woods. It actually starts north of Kaysville through Layton, but UDOT claims that it'll hopefully take care of a lot of the stuff that I hear in KSL every day of the slowdowns in Kaysville and Farmington. So we hope that's the case. And again, on I-15 heading south, 2023 is a bit of a guess there. That's from UDOT. Shepherd Lane interchange. So when we talked about Benchland, they're there on the screen. There's probably some work that will happen there in the near future. I'll talk about it a little bit more, but you can see Shepherd Lane's extending south somewhere. And so that's a big item, and where that ends up going on a new road, a new facility. It's 950 south, 950 north in Farmington, I think is that street that it's connecting to. And then the big project, the West Davis Corridor. And so Kaysville for many decades has been preserving land for this corridor that's been planned by simply not annexing further west. And so it essentially skirts along the west edge of the city boundary. It's the Legacy Highway extension heading north. The big conversation in our neck of the woods for the past several years has been, does that go Glover's Lane? Does it go through the Shepherd Lane area? That has been determined, and it will go through Glover's Lane south, which leaves a corridor that's been preserved for the possible Shepherd Lane area open, which we've been in discussion with Farmington on putting in a connector road of sorts through that corridor, so a non-highway, non-freeway, but a facility that would connect Shepherd Lane to, I call it the Mink Farm Interchange. I don't know if there's a more formal name for it, but there are two interchanges along the West Davis corridor that will be within Kaysville City jurisdiction. One just south of the sewer district on the far southwest edge of town, and another along 200 North on the far west end of 200 North. So that's what UDOT's up to. Just a quick glimpse. The city itself, we're always doing road projects, more on the maintenance side of things and building, but we are improving road surfaces, always doing chip seals and asphalt treatments. We recently got our road utility fee in, so you'll see the impact on how much road work gets done over the years with that. Again, this is dated a little bit, but we just finally got 4 lanes over the 200 North overpass as it was just restriped. We're seeing more active transportation improvements, bike lanes, off-street paths and trails go throughout the city. Fiber infrastructures being installed for city functions, but could lead to other items in the future to be seen. Pioneer Park, a new park in town. If you haven't seen it, got a ways to go, but it looks pretty spectacular even at this point on the south end of Angel Street. The old library building discussion and what happens with that. So right here next door, if you haven't been involved, get involved with that. The city's looking at how to utilize that building that currently sits vacant, and whether it's that building or something different. It sounds like there are a lot of options on the table. Apart from the city, some of our public education partners are busy. The DTC next year will be under construction for the Allied Health Building, which is a $30 million plus building going in there. It's a big deal for teaching nurses and other medical profession. Mountain High is currently under construction for a big remodel that the Planning Commission saw not too long ago. And then the Botanical Center for Utah State here in town is constantly doing some things. So they've just recently added the extension classes over there in new space. And they've got a lot of plans that if you're bored and want to come to my desk or visit them, I could show you for the very long term. So just some context as you're making decisions on, where we're at, where we stand, and what we have left, and hopefully that helps you formulate, if there are ordinances that need to be looked at based on that, or just makes you make a different decision, or if we're going great, then that's fantastic too. But if you have any questions, let me know. I probably took more than my 15 minutes.
I think this is great. I'd love to get a copy of this.
Yeah, I think maybe for all of us.
It's interesting with only 400 acres left. That's
I think we've worked ourselves out of a job.
occupied. Yeah, 800 to maybe 1,000 more home potential. Yeah, so we'll run out in the next 7 or 8 years.
The current rate.
Is there any talk about making a pedestrian overpass on either? Well, I guess 200 North would be the one that's in Kaysville, right? Because the Shepherd Lane one that's Farmington still, right?
Technically, Shepherd Lane on I-15 is in Farmington. There has been talk about, obviously, when they build a new overpass, they'll put a pedestrian component onto it. It likely won't be separated. It'll be a edge of the road sidewalk or something similar to what you typically see. There's been talk about a pedestrian overpass like at Center Street, so you get it away from where the traffic is. It's just really hard to justify $8 to $10 million for 100 bicyclers a day.
Tell you 200, now that's wrapped down to Angel Street. That sure looks good down there. The bike lane's in it as well, and
That's correct, yeah.
the congestion has eased up quite a bit. At least for me, it has. Driving that every day.
Glad to hear it.
And we anticipate that at some point the west side of 200 North will require the 5 lanes, and then we'll restripe it to match what's over the bridge.
Yeah, it looks like it's wide enough that you could have done more
It was
lanes
built wide
there,
enough to
so.
accommodate that same cross-section at 5 lanes, yeah.
Right
We'll
now,
see
you
what,
at least got a middle turn lane that you don't block traffic up if you want to turn. So
we'll see what West Davis does to the traffic pattern, and also the new high school should pull a little traffic off Second North because they'll be going south instead of everybody accumulating at Second North and coming east. So we'll see how that affects it, and if that buys us a few more years before we have to go to 5 lanes on that lower end.
The limited amount of land we have left, it seems like the flag lots are going to continue to be popular. So can we have a discussion or put something out on the agenda that establishes criteria for deciding whether or not it can be 1 house deep or 2 houses deep? Or is that an appropriate thing to do?
No, that's very appropriate. I think all types of infill development need to be reviewed by the city because of where we're at in our growth pattern.
Okay. I think it'd be nice to have something that was standard so that people know what to expect.
Yeah.
And we've got an ordinance in place or something. Okay.
well, and I missed the last meeting, so welcome to both you guys.
Oh,
Oh,
thanks.
thanks.
Okay, thank you for that presentation. Once again, our city councilman is the only public left for the public. Call the public. Have you prepared anything this time for the?
If I talk, I'll just get in trouble.
And he goes on.
Okay, next we'll go to reports, correspondence, calendar.
Just on for a regular scheduled on the 23rd, 2 weeks from today. And just a reminder, I've heard from some of you, but if you're interested in, there's a few training opportunities coming up. Utah League of Cities and Towns Planners Day. Sandy City is hosting the fall conference for the Utah APA. And also Luau, the land use correct me here, Wilf, if I'm getting it wrong. I want to say Institute of Utah, but Academy of Utah. Thank you.
Land use academy.
Has a training that they're actually, you can go to the Utah State Botanical Center and watch the broadcast from there. So nice and close. It is on a Saturday, but you can hear from one of your own a little bit if you like. So put you on the spot there. But if you're just interested in those, I have sent out emails. I'll send a reminder. Just let us know, and we'll get you involved if you'd like to take the opportunity.
Lyle, there's also the Utah Land Use Law Conference, which will be October. I'll have to get the exact dates. 20-something down in Sandy at the Realtors Building. They've had that every year for the last several years. Be some pretty good topics on that conference this year as well.
Plus, for all you attorneys, you can get continuing education credits on that one.
Yeah, but I'll say this: it's much
Pretty
more
deep.
interesting than just for attorneys. There's a lot of interesting land use stuff that we talk about.
I think Councilmember Page and I attended that last year, and I don't think I've seen that in my email this year, but I'll send the information to you so that you've got that on the radar. And it was a good one.
Great, thank you. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second. Oh, you don't have to second.
Second, third, fourth.
Everybody.